It's June 2022. Russia is at war with Ukraine. Gasoline is $5 a gallon. The S&P 500 is down 24% from its peak. Houses are more expensive than ever, and crypto is imploding before our eyes. Now more than ever, those on the outside, including everyday people, are panicking, worried about their 401ks, extreme inflation, and the stability of their jobs. The financial markets seem to be headed for ruin, and in today's video, we explore exactly that. Is this the big one, the massive depression this country hasn't experienced in over 100 years? Is it true that economic conditions far worse than 2008 await us? To truly explore these possibilities, it's necessary to take a step back and peek at a piece of incredibly important history. Back in 1929, this country experienced something that scarred the minds of everyone who lived through it. An event so severe, so damaging to the country's psyche, it revolutionized policy, changed history, and traumatized an entire generation. Now, because it occurred over 90 years ago, the memories and lessons of this shocking era have long been forgotten and overshadowed by other historical events that have a more intense and concentrated storyline. I'm talking about the 1929 crash that led to the Great Depression. An event that showcases what is possible on the other side of the spectrum, a situation that was so bad it devastated the country for decades. Instead of me summarizing it, I'll let Warren Buffett do it. During the 2020 annual Berkshire Conference, he spent 20 minutes going over the Great Depression. The full clip is linked in the description below, but here's an important snippet that truly describes the event that changed finance forever.
The stock market went from a level of 240 to 241, which was a noticeable decline because if somebody had given me $1,000 on the day I was born and I'd bought stocks with it and bought the Dow average, my $1,000 would have become $170 in less than 2 years. And that is something that none of us ever experienced. That we may have had it with one stock occasionally, but in terms of having a broad range of America marked down 83% in 2 years, and marked down 89% of the peak that was in September 3rd, 1929, was extraordinary. And in that intervening period, less than 1 year after I was born, just slightly less than 1 year, my dad went to the bank where he worked and had his account, and of course, the bank had a sign on it closed, and so he had no job. And he had 2 kids at that point, and his father had a grocery store, but my grandfather said to my father that don't worry about your groceries, Howard. He says, I'll just let your bill run. That was my grandfather. Not exactly. He cared about his family, but he wasn't going to go crazy. One of the things as I look back on that period is, and I don't think economists generally like to give it that much of a point of importance, but if you have over 4,000 banks fail, that's 4,000 local experiences where people save and save and save and put their money away, and then someday they reach for it and it's gone. And that happens, in all 48 states, and it happens to your neighbors and it happens to your relatives. It has to have an effect on the psyche. So the Great Depression went on, and it lasted a very long time, but it lasted a lot longer in the minds of people than it did actually in its effects. World War II came along, and on sort of an involuntary manner, we adopted Keynesianism. We started running fiscal deficits, of course, that were absolutely huge, and took our debt up to a percentage of GDP, which we've never reached, had never reached before, and never have reached since. So we had an enormous economic recovery, but the minds of people had been so scarred, the memories. Parents told their children. 1929 became a symbol in people's minds. I mean, if you said 1929, it was like saying 1776 or 1492. I mean, everybody knew exactly what you were talking about. And it affected stock prices in a rather remarkable way, to the point, if you'll change to the next slide, it was January 4th of 1951 that the kid who was born on August 30th in 1930 had finished college before the stock market got back to where it was at that earlier time.
Today we find ourselves battling a strange mix of issues that are pointing to a collapse so large and so painful, some fringe economists are suggesting 1929 in 2022. Their argument is a simple one, and if you've been paying attention to the markets over the past few years, you can easily see their point. Back in 2008, the Federal Reserve lowered rates from 5.25% to essentially zero. This was done in order to jumpstart the economy and save us from the Great Recession. On top of this, a number of programs were introduced to increase public spending in order to save jobs and stop further economic decline. This included the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, which injected over $831 billion into the system. These radical policies worked, but in essence, they were just temporary solutions to a permanent problem. Think of them as alcohol to mask the pain. What happened during the party was pure euphoria, a stock market that went up and up with nearly no major declines for over a decade. From March 2009 to December 2021, the S&P 500 averaged over 17% per year. An absurd return representing one of the greatest bull runs of all time, and the reasons were pretty easy to spot. From 2009 to 2015, the Fed kept rates at zero, only raising them slightly in 2019 before lowering them back to zero in 2020. And while this easy money environment gave stocks the run of the century, it also created a massive problem that was a ticking time bomb. You see, the market had been conditioned to buy every dip because at the end of the day, the Federal Reserve was ready to step in and give support every time we encountered trouble. And if they couldn't lower rates, they would simply print more money and introduce all kinds of special programs meant to keep markets up. We saw this in 2020 when they printed over 30% of all dollars in existence in under 1 year. But while actions like this worked, they eventually over the course of a decade lost their potency. Excessive money printing finally led to the ultimate side effect, severe inflation. Today we have an 8.6% inflation rate, and if we still measured using the 1980 methodology, it would be well over 10%. On top of this, rates are already near zero, and the Fed is left in the ultimate predicament. On one hand, they can't lower rates any more than zero, nor can they print more money because it will lead to even more inflation. This leaves the Federal Reserve largely hopeless in reviving the economy the quick and easy way. On the other hand, they could pull a Paul Volcker and raise rates to extreme levels to battle inflation, but that would ultimately ruin the economy, putting us into a government-induced recession. This uncertainty has pushed the markets into a tailspin, and given rising prices, higher layoff numbers, and consumer confidence falling off a cliff, many are wondering, could this be our 1929, a perfect storm of economic and geopolitical conditions that come together and ruin the everything bubble that has been forming over the past decade? The proof for this bubble is easy to spot using a variety of measurements. One of the simplest is the Buffett indicator, named after Warren Buffett, who famously called this ratio at one point the best single measure of where valuations stand at any given moment. This ratio during the high in December of 2021 reached over 220%, which is over 2 standard deviations from normal, which in plain English means that the market was insanely overvalued. Now, since this recent decline, the indicator has fallen to just 161%, or about 27% higher than the historical average. Given the potential troubles ahead, we speculate that further declines in the S&P wouldn't surprise anybody, just given how far and how long this major bubble has been brewing. But can it be that this recession turns into the Great Depression? Well, in my opinion, most likely not. The structural changes made to the banking sector and government have ensured that normal everyday people stay afloat even during the worst of times, while while yes, we may face severe difficulties, it won't be to the same degree that those in the 30s faced. Remember that many people during this time period lost their life savings overnight because banks simply closed without warnings and FDIC insurance did not exist. America was a different type of country where we didn't have history to draw from. Most historians and economists agreed that the Great Depression wouldn't have lasted so long if the government made different choices in the preceding years. Congress made appalling decisions that extended the economic turmoil. In 1930, it raised tariffs so high they virtually closed the borders to imports and exports. It also doubled income tax rates in 1932. Franklin Roosevelt, who campaigned on a platform of less government, actually gave America much more. His New Deal raised taxes, even proposing a 99.5% tax rate on incomes over $100,000, and these wild policies punished investment and killed business with rules and red tape, grinding the recovery to snail pace. We today know the consequences of such actions and hopefully understand the implications such a reaction would bring. But even if the wrong choices are made, America tends to persevere over time. Buffett ends his 20-minute speech on 1929 with the following: good advice to follow for any investor not looking to get rich quickly. Take a listen.
And we found that nothing can stop America when you get right down to it. And it's been true all along. It may have been interrupted with the scariest of scenarios when you had a war with one group of states fighting another group of states. And it may have been tested again in the Great Depression, and it may be tested now to some degree. But in the end, the answer is never bet against America. And that, in my view, is as true today as it was in 1789, and even was true during the Civil War and the depths of the Depression.
As always, thank you guys for watching. Please make sure you hit that like and subscribe button if you enjoyed it.